Hey everybody, this is Liam Martin from Running Remote, and in today's video we're going to be talking about hybrid work. A lot of you guys have probably heard of that term. I don't know whether or not all of you know exactly what that thing is, so I thought I would take this video to actually let you know exactly what does a hybrid or flexible work model actually mean. Let's do it. So before I get into what the actual definition of hybrid work is, there are actually three different models of work inside of like the kind of remote work community. There is on-premise work, which is just quite literally you working inside of an office, i.e. on a particular premise. There is hybrid or flexible work, and we'll get into the actual definitions of those two things in just a minute. And then there is remote or remote first, remote only type of work. So as an example, we run a company that has employees in 40 different countries all over the world. We don't have a physical office, and we run a remote work model. Someone like Google, as an example, which is kind of remote actually right now, but is planning on going back to an on-premise model. Everyone is in an office. You actually have to show up and go to an office every single day. That is a on-premise model. And there are a bunch of companies that are looking at a hybrid or flexible work model, which is right in the middle. That's the thing that a whole bunch of people are pretty interested about. When we polled internally people who recently went remote during 2020, 50% of them said that they're going to stick with the remote model. 10% of them said that they're going to go completely back to the office, i.e. a on-premise model, and 40% are going to go hybrid. Now, what the heck does hybrid mean? So the definition of a hybrid model is this. Basically, it is a single department or a percentage of the company that works remotely and a certain percentage of the company that works in an office. Now, also, there is the terminology flexible work, which is pretty much anyone can work either completely remotely or inside of an office. But to be completely honest with you, the real term that's being used in the industry is really kind of like hybridizing those two terms together. So hybrid work is really either a department or a certain component of your employees work remotely and a certain percent of your employees work in the office. And then also too, you can work a couple days remotely and you can work a couple days in the office. So I know that that sounds a little confusing, but if I told you kind of, we're splitting hairs between like flexible work and hybrid work, frankly, you'd get super bored and it doesn't really make much sense because the entire industry now is just saying hybrid work is basically both of those things. But if it comes up at an HR dinner party or something like that, you can tell them the difference and tell them that I told you so. So if you're a company owner right now, you are really trying to figure out, okay, which option do I choose and which one is the best for my company? Well, guess what? I'm gonna tell you that too. Advantages of a hybrid work from home model, there's quite a few. The biggest one is actually that you can hire both locally and globally. So you can hire your staff that maybe you already have in your local location, but that you can also hire people globally. Globally, the cost of labor is generally going to be lower. You're going to get more for your dollar in different jurisdictions. As an example, you really have to make sure that you're figuring out whether or not someone is a contractor or whether they're a full-time employee. Platforms like remoteteam.com or remote.com can help you with that, like an employment record system. But fundamentally, it's really a great spot to be able to take advantage of the remote work labor market while also making sure that you're keeping the kind of the people that you had before the pandemic, you're keeping them in one particular location and effectively keeping tabs on them. Next point is you can actually give people some degree of freedom for more deep work. So it's no surprise that on-premise, i.e. people working inside of an office, they get distracted a lot more often than people working from home. It's very clear, a lot of the data backs this up, that you getting bugged every 15 to 20 minutes for a 5-minute chat or being brought into a meeting or something like that stops you from actually completing large tasks that require a lot of your creative brain power, and remote gives them that type of opportunity, so that if they want to work remotely a couple days a week to really get some deep work done, they can do that. And then if they want to come into the office for collaboration, they can do that as well. So a lot of people think this is the best of both worlds. Spoiler alert, I do not, but we'll get into that later. But it really does provide you both of those two options, which is really great if you're thinking about the hybrid model. It's also significantly cheaper than a full on-premise model. And this is probably not very surprising as well. If you have someone who works out of the office 4 days a week and only works in the office 1 day a week, then you would move to people having committed desks to a floating desk model, or even just sort of like coming into the office just for meetings. And that's a pretty cheap way to be able to run a business. Number one, you've probably cut your actual like office space costs by, I don't know, 75% at least for something like that. Or you can just literally work out of some co-working spaces, so you can bring all your people to like a subleased place, which is significantly cheaper. You also don't have to get them equipment in the office as well. You basically make sure that all of their equipment is set up at home, or maybe they have their own equipment. So the costs are significantly lower with a hybrid model, and that's really good for anyone, particularly in this time that's always trying to cut costs. Also, the hybrid model is generally better for work accountability, and that's not what a lot of people really want to hear, but fundamentally the reason why a lot of people say, hey, you got to come back into the office, and I'm hearing this a lot, is we want you to work remotely, but you have to be in the office on Mondays and Fridays. Why? Well, because when you ask the actual employers, they say because we don't want people turning it into a 3-day weekend or a 4-day weekend. And I totally understand that. The number one reason why employers don't want people to go remote is a lack of accountability. You could use a tool like Time Doctor to be able to solve for those problems, but in my opinion, this isn't really the core issue that you need to kind of deal with, especially if they are in an office. I think that being able to make them more accountable to what they're doing is really a secondary issue. I think the other things that I've mentioned above are just huge gains for the hybrid model, particularly over an on-premise one. Now, we talked about advantages. Let's also talk about disadvantages of a hybrid work model. One of the biggest problems that hybrid remote workers kind of get is they feel like second-class citizens. This is something that the CEO of Buffer has quoted quite a bit, which is if you have employees that are in an office and you have employees that are not in office, the employees that are in the office usually get access to decision makers and the ability to kind of like move up in the organization considerably faster than the remote workers, because they're in these little like Zoom boxes all day long. And maybe you'd have a formalized meeting with everybody, but then afterwards at the water cooler, Johnny would say, hey, Liam, I really want the budget to be able to move forward on this project, and you just say, okay, fine, that's cool. That's the problem that the hybrid model has, and it is significant. And also too, with remote work becoming so much bigger than it was pre-pandemic, a major significant percentage of your workforce is going to want to work remotely. As I had stated before, about 50% of companies are going to stay remote, and based off the study that you look at, 70 to 90% of remote workers that are currently remote want to stay remote even after the pandemic ends. So it's going to be a really difficult situation where, let's say 50, 60, 70% of your team is completely remote, and then 20 to 30% are not remote. Those people that are remote are probably actually going to be better workers than the ones that are not remote, just simply because they have options, and they know that if you are a remote worker, they know that they're really good at their jobs because they don't have to kind of play politics to be able to protect for it. So that's a major issue that you're definitely going to have to pay attention to. How do you actually solve for this second-class remote work syndrome that exists inside of hybrid teams? Next disadvantage is you can't have any location-independent workers. This is something that probably not a lot of business owners really know about, but there was this entire trend before the pandemic called digital nomadism, and another term for it is location-independent workers. And what they did was they would travel the world from their laptops. So they would work, they would have active jobs, but they wouldn't be in a particular location for an extended amount of time. And there's gonna be a lot more of them after the pandemic. And they're really good workers if you can make sure that you're keeping them accountable and they are focused. So this is a major workforce that you're going to want to be able to take advantage of. And inside of a hybrid model in which people have to show up to the physical office, let's say at least 1 day a week, they will not be interested in that model at all. Let me tell you, they will hate that model. Also, there's a whole bunch of people that want to, as an example, they might be living in San Francisco at an $8,000 a month 2-bedroom apartment because of their job at Google. Well, the moment that they can work remotely, they're not going to be in that $8,000 a month apartment. They are instead going to be in Tulsa, and for $8,000 a month, you could probably buy a block of Tulsa, for crying out loud. It's really going to change the way that work works. And I think a lot of those workers are going to want to be location independent. And if you don't have the infrastructure to be able to support that, it's going to be a major problem for you running down the line. Next problem in a hybrid work model is collaboration and time differences are going to require significant effort to actually solve. This is something that, again, we can get into it in some other videos that I've definitely got on this YouTube channel. Just kind of type in running remote asynchronous work and you will be able to see a full breakdown of what I'm talking about. But effectively, you need to be able to make sure that you are communicating asynchronously with all of your different employees, and you're communicating in a way where everything is documented and digitized and communicated effectively. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but this is a big issue that a lot of employers don't really understand yet. Is the actual way to be able to manage remote workers is somewhat different from the way to manage on-premise workers and even hybrid workers. And in my opinion, it's probably going to be a big problem and kind of a readjustment period for a lot of employers that are just going back to the office post-pandemic, seeing how to deal with these new remote workers that are in there. But anyways, let's get into that right now. So how do you actually solve this if you really want to be hybrid? Well, there's a couple ways that you can do that. First off is, as I said before, you need to run your entire organization like it is a remote first company. So what does that mean? Well, asynchronous communication is absolutely critical to the way that you communicate. So over here, we have asynchronous communication, which is the ability to be able to communicate information and then wait, basically batch the consumption of that information to when the individual team member chooses. So think of like Netflix as an example, as a model. I don't have to show up and watch Netflix at exactly 8 p.m. to be able to see the next episode of, what's a good show that I'm watching right now? Snowpiercer is a good one. I love Snowpiercer. That's been in like 2 seasons right now. Again, I've been locked down for about 13 months. Please, I do apologize, but Snowpiercer is a fantastic show and I've been watching that for quite a while, but I can choose when I want to watch it. In comparison to the old days when it was just television, you could only watch that show at 8 p.m. on Fridays. That is a synchronous model of communication. And that's the thing that's really difficult to be able to figure out inside of a remote first or hybrid modeled team, because not everyone is actually going to be in the same location at the same time like they are in an on-premise model. So you really have to protect against that. So what does that mean? Well, that actually means documenting everything inside of the organization and then digitizing it. Yes, so what I mean by that is you can take a tool like GitLab or Process Street or any of these other tools. Trainual is another really great one that allows you to build a process, digitize it, meaning you record it and you put it up on one of their platforms, and then anyone else inside of the organization can get access to that information. Once you can actually do that, then your organization can grow regardless of where it's located, because there isn't someone inside of your organization, inside of your office, that only knows how to do that one thing. I call that sacred knowledge inside of the organization, because if John decides to quit or to do something else, you're kind of screwed. So you need to be able to make sure that you've got that in place from a process documentation perspective. And this also relates literally into like doing meetings. So if you're doing a Zoom call, you want to be able to make sure that you're actually recording that Zoom call and posting it somewhere. So if someone actually wants to go through and scrub through the minutes of that meeting, they can. And if you could even do an even better part of this would be recording the minutes of that meeting and putting it in a really short form document so that everyone can have access to what did you guys talk about, what were the issues, what conclusions did you come to, what were the to-dos, and what are you gonna do next? Just doing that allows for your organization to grow so much faster and efficiently, and most importantly, remotely or hybridly. So really important that you do that to be able to make sure that your organization is successful for the long term. Another piece which is definitely important you need to pay attention to is you need to measure your bias for giving on-premise employees promotions versus remote ones. So if it isn't the same rate, something is honestly wrong. Either you're not choosing good talent remotely, or the talent that is remote was just as good and you've got some type of personal bias to employees that are in the office. And listen, it happened to me a couple years ago. We used to have a couple offices and I actually had a salesperson that was constantly badgering me to get like a huge 49-inch massive monitor. And I was like, what do you need a 49-inch monitor for? You're a salesperson. That's not what you need. And he was like, no, I really need this monitor. And it was just this constant, every week, bringing it back up to the point where I just said, fine, here's the company credit card, go get a monitor. But here's what that created as a problem. Then 10 other employees contacted me that were remote and they said, hey, this guy just got a 49-inch monitor. Why don't you get me a 49-inch monitor? And this created a lot of bias inside of the organization. So that's what I'm talking about. You need to be able to measure that bias against everyone in the organization. And usually your HR department or whoever's in charge of recruitment can measure that for you to make sure that you're not really giving people an undue bias inside of the organization, because that's not going to make you any more money or make your employees happy. The last point I want to make is you need to be able to make all meetings remote. So what does that mean? Well, so usually when you have a hybrid model, you've got 3 or 4 people on a Zoom box and you're looking at a big screen, and then you've got about 8 people sitting at a board table, a board meeting table. I don't know. I don't have an office. So like that big table where all of those people sit and you see them. And that sucks because frankly, the 4 people that are in the little boxes, they're the ones that are supposedly putting in just as much work and input as everyone at the table, but it just doesn't work pragmatically. So what happens is those 4 little people disappear off the box when the meeting is over, and then there's 15 minutes of chit chat with the 8 people that are in person, and they completely change the meeting after the fact. How you can change this is get everyone on their individual computers. Do not have people meet in person unless everyone is meeting in person. Have them all work from their individual computers, record it, write down the minutes of it, put it on some type of digital platform so that people can consume it and figure out what decisions you came to. I'm telling you, this is going to make your hybrid or remote first organization so much more successful than doing it the old-fashioned way. So if you thought that that was interesting, please let me know down below if there's any other advantages or disadvantages of a hybrid model that I should know about. And if you disagree with my definition of hybrid work, please put it down in the comments below. I love getting hate down there. It is the best part of my day. Not really, but anyways, just put it down there anyways. That's it for this video. If you are interested in more videos on this subject, this is all we talk about on this YouTube channel. This is literally how we build and scale remote teams. So while you're down there, click the like button, click the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video.